I'm now going to look at close-up and macro photography. So some definitions just to get ourselves clear as what we're talking about. Close-up photography has traditionally meant photographing small objects at magnifications of up to 1:1 or life size. Macro, in the traditional sense, means taking images between life size, which is 1 times magnification, and 10 times life size, 10 times magnification. Microphotography or photomicroscopy is any photograph using magnifications greater than 10 times life size. Now these definitions were taken from an old photographic encyclopedia, and a lot of the terms are kind of smudged a little bit these days. You know, people say I do macro photography when they actually mean close-up. But I'm not going to get too mixed up with these. But those are the traditional definitions. So some issues with close-up and macro photography. Most normal lenses cannot focus close enough to capture a really close-up image, like up to 1:1. So special lenses or attachment are needed to get into this realm. Light values drop as close-up magnification increases. So once we get past a certain close-up distance, the light has got to spread out over the sensor to a greater extent, so that by the time you get to 1:1 reproduction, you've actually lost 2 stops of light. Also, the depth of field really diminishes as you get closer and closer, magnify things up. Camera shake, this is all emphasized because you're magnifying a small object. It's like putting a great big telephoto lens on, only we're in reverse. We're doing it to a very small object. And diffraction becomes very apparent. Because of the limited depth of field, we tend to stop our lenses right down to try and increase this depth of field. But diffraction is a problem because as you start to close your aperture down, the diffraction effects become more and more evident, which can ruin the crispness of your images. Of course, you know, it opens up a whole new world of photography once you get into it. So let's have a look at some close-up lenses abilities. So even some ordinary lenses, you know, the standard lens or even some zooms, can actually get up to a third to a half life size images. We can attach a kind of filter, but it's a close-up lens, to an ordinary lens and arrive at a closer up image. So this is the simplest and cheapest method. It probably doesn't give you the best results, but they can be quite effective. And it screws onto the filter thread of your lens. It effectively shortens the focal length of the main lens. And there's no light loss when you actually use these. What to say, it gives you probably the poorest results unless you stop it right down, the lens. Extension tubes. These are, again, relatively cheap. They're very versatile because you can use them on different lenses. You can get very good results depending on the quality of your main lens. They also have electronic functions, circuits, so that when it's attached to the camera, the electronic controls of the lenses should still operate. Now, macro lenses are specialist lenses designed to give you the best results when they're close up. But most of them, I mean, this is a Canon 100mm, that only goes up to 1 times life size, which is the start of the macro definition. This one here is actually goes from about 2 times to about 5 times life size. And they do tend to be quite expensive, but they are designed for a specific purpose. They can actually be used, most of them, this one can't, but this one can be used as a really high quality like portrait lens or just a straight 100mm lens. Some attachments, angle finders are really useful. It allows you to take pictures close down to the ground or anything like that. We've got remote releases, useful for many aspects of photography, especially for macro. And we've got ring flashes, we've got ordinary flashes, but ring flashes are more specialist for macro photography. And the flash provides plenty of light, it arrests movement, and it allows for small apertures to be used on your lenses. But because of the way the light falls off with distance, it can cause strange or very dark backgrounds, and illumination can be a problem with your images. It can look unnatural. It can also give you very bright specular highlights of insect, chitin and stuff like that. So normal lenses are designed to focus from infinity to a modest closeness, and their design and construction prevents us from producing really close-up images. And if you remember from some of the previous videos, we've got a subject at infinity, so the light is coming in virtually in parallel lines. It goes through the lens and it's brought to a sharp focus. So this is the 50mm lens. The lens is 50mm from the film or the sensor plane. And if this was a simple lens rather than a compound lens like here, it should go from the sensor to about 50mm. In real life, of course, these are compound lenses and the mathematics doesn't work out quite like that. But just pretend for an instance this is actually 50mm. So when focused closer, the lens extends away from the sensor, allowing a close subject to be focused. So this movement of the lens away from the sensor is the main principle for focusing closer. So you can see that when it focuses closer, the central part of the lens elements actually move away from the sensor. So now something close up can be brought into sharp focus because the lens has moved away from the sensor. In fact, it's probably moved about 60mm. Maybe got a 10mm extension there. So supplementary close-up lenses. Our standard 50mm focus at infinity is 50mm from the sensor. Okay, we know that. A supplementary close-up lens, simple menisci, they come in different diopters, what they call diopters, and a 1 diopter means that this lens will actually focus to 1 meter. So something at infinity will be focused to 1 meter. 2 diopter, 2/3 of a meter. 3 diopter, 1/3 of a meter. So the more the diopter, the stronger the close-up effect. This is a 4 times diopter. So when you attach this 4 times to a lens, be it a standard lens, be it a telephoto lens, if the lens itself is focused at infinity and you attach this filter, this close-up lens, to the front, irrespective of the focal length of the lens, it will focus to 1/4 of a meter. So by attaching the 4 diopter, we can now focus with our normal lens to 1/4 of a meter. We can also use the focus extension of the lens itself. So if we extend the lens a little bit itself, that will give us an even closer focus effect. So extension tubes are placed between the main lens and the camera. The hollow tubes with no optical elements, so you can see all the way through, but say they do have electrical contacts which allows transmission of the camera to the lens and back again. So extension tubes effectively extend the focusing range of the lens, and of course you can use them on standard lenses and telephoto lenses, and they usually come in sets of 3 of different lengths. So the amount of magnification or closeness depends on the focal length of the main lens and the tube that you select. So a standard lens, a 50mm lens, will actually focus closer than if you had a telephoto on any of these extension tubes. Wider angle lenses produce a greater magnification effect. So 50mm of extension on a 100mm lens gives it a half life-size image. So there's our 100mm lens. Okay. We've added 50mm of extension. So that allows this combination to focus to half-life size. And when you add it all up, it effectively comes to a 150mm lens. A 50mm, so we've reduced the lens focal length by 50, half, plus a 50mm extension will actually give us a life-size image. And because we've got to full life size, we're actually losing 2 stops of illumination, because the light from the normal lens is now having to spread out over the sensor twice, so 4 times the area. So this arrangement is effectively a 100mm lens. So even closer can be achieved by, again, using the lens function, focus function, by extending the lens a little bit. Macro lenses. These are dedicated lenses computed to give their best results at close focus, unlike normal lenses, which are optimized generally for around about infinity. They generally produce the best results. They come in different focal lengths. So a 50mm, you must get quite close to the subject in order to magnify up using a 50mm lens, but you do get the greatest depth of field from a typical aperture. A 100mm will give you the same sort of magnification, but you need to be further away from the subject, and of course the depth of field will diminish because it's a telephoto with this any particular aperture setting. Some of them go up to 180 or 200mm macro, but these do allow you to get a lot further away from the subject, but again the depth of field will decrease, camera shake will increase, the effects of it. So although they are good for certain things, they do induce other problems when you're taking macro shots. And there are lenses that are available that will allow you to go even closer. So I say this is like a it's about 1 to 5 times magnification. You can go even closer. So just using very simple reversing rings, we call it reversing rings here. There's an attachment here that fits onto the camera, and there's a filter thread also attached to it. So you then screw your, in this case a standard lens, back, reversed, screw the reversed lens onto this attachment, and then you can take pictures like that, and you can get quite close using reversing rings. You can actually get some specialist equipment which will connect your electronic functions of your lens to the camera in this sort of situation. You can actually stack lenses. So in this case we've got a 100mm lens with a reversing ring, a 50mm reversed. You can actually use wide angles to reverse, and screwed onto there, and it gives you like a compound microscope effect. And again, it's quite cheap to do this. Here I've gone and adapted a microscope so that we can actually take pictures through the microscope, and you can get to images like this really close. So there's a whole world out there, unseen world, macro and close-up photography, if you wish to enjoy that sort of thing. So there you go. Go and experiment.